listening to The Unburied Collective, a space for the stories they told us to bury. I'm Navy, and around here we speak the unspeakable. We feel the heavy things, and we pull each other out one truth at a time. So take a breath. You're not alone anymore. Let's go deep together. Welcome to the Unburied Collective. I'm your host, Navy, and today I want to talk about adoption trauma. Before we start, I would just like to put a couple disclaimers right here. This podcast contains personal reflections based on my lived experiences. Names and details may be changed for privacy. My intention is to share my truth, not to harm anyone involved. I am not a licensed therapist or a mental health professional. Everything I share comes from my own experience, personal healing journey, and years of navigating trauma, family estrangement, and emotional recovery. This podcast is a space for truth telling, not clinical advice. Please take what resonates and leave the rest. And always remember your story, your pace, your healing. Okay, so I first heard about adoption trauma back in 2022. I had just moved back to Illinois after living about 14 hours away in a different state with my family. I had gone through months of dealing with my biological mother being in and out of the hospital. She was going through stage 4 liver failure at the time and was given 6 months to live. Moving was a huge decision for me to make at that moment, and a very hard one at that. But I realized that that was the best decision to make, not just for me, but for my son, so that he could be closer to his father. At the time, she was out of the hospital and my grandmother was actually taking care of her, which is her mom. So I packed my U-Haul, we said our goodbyes, and we left, drove about 5 hours and stopped overnight at a hotel. The next morning, we went down to the swimming pool. We had a little bit of fun, went back up to the room. Once we got up to the room, I got a phone call from my grandmother. And when I answered it, she was very hysterical. She stated that she had tried to call everyone else, but no one was answering, that she didn't know what to do, but that my biological mom was being taken to the hospital by ambulance and she was unresponsive. I made the decision at that point to let my son go with his father and go the rest of the way back up to Illinois. And I was going to go back where my family was. So I drove the 5 hours back. Once I got there, I got to see her for a little bit, and then I went to go get her a drink. And the moment that I left, she had another seizure. So when I went back, they had just calmed her down from it. I think like she was coming back too. And I just remember being so scared. I didn't want to leave her that night, even though she insisted that I go back to the hotel and get some sleep. I had booked a hotel that was right across the street from the hospital so that I could be close in case anything happened. So I spent a little bit more time with her, and then I went back to the hotel to sleep. The next day, I get up, go to the hospital. We're all hanging out for a while. She has this huge seizure. It was heartbreaking in a way that I don't even know how to describe. And at that point, she just kept having them over and over and over again. And sometimes when things like this happen, it really makes you wake up to a lot of different things, like the way that you interacted with this person before, or things that you should have said or should have done or should have helped with or could have done better. And I remember all of that racing through my head while she was just laying there, and she was like staring at the wall, and she had all of these like things on her head because they were trying to monitor her, and she just looked empty. It scared the shit out of me, to say the least. That day, she ends up going into the ICU because she wouldn't stop having the seizures. And I can't remember exactly, but I think that they put her in an induced coma. Either way, she wasn't awake. I knew this, and I thought we were going to lose her because, like I said before, they had only given her 6 months to live anyway. And as I left the hospital a little while later, I began to think about all of these things and they just kind of started to consume me. I had decided that I was going to go to the hospital later after everyone had left and that I was going to say what I felt like I needed to say, just in case I didn't have another opportunity. Now, if you listened to the podcast before this one where I talk about masking, then you've heard me talk a little bit about how it was growing up and the way that I was perceiving my biological parents. How I knew that when my mother gave me away, that she was so adamant about it that she shouted, "Don't ask me again. I'm telling you I don't want her." A lot of people put her in a negative light for giving up her child, for not trying harder, a multitude of other things. And in a way that shaped how I treated her. I'm not saying that we didn't have any good times or that I was just always mean to her, but it did change the way that I viewed her. And as I got older, I started to realize she really did make me an exception. Even though she gave me up, she always found a way to make me feel special to her. Through the holidays, when she would come to visit, she would always get me something, even if she couldn't get anyone else anything. When it came to talking on the phone, if nobody could get her on the phone, I could call her and she would answer. If you went to her house unannounced, everyone knew she wouldn't answer the door. You had to let her know you were coming first. If I showed up and I knocked on the door, she would answer for me. And I always knew this, but I never gave her the credit for it. So that night, I sat in the hospital parking lot and thought about everything that I wanted to say and tried my best to find the courage to go up there and do it. Once I got up to the room, she was awake, but she wasn't herself. She was hallucinating. She was being very mean and she didn't know who I was. This scared me, but the nurses reassured me that this is just something that can happen sometimes and that it'll probably go back to normal. They told me to leave and go rest for a little while and then come back in the morning. So that's what I did. There were also some other family issues that had been going on before this. For instance, the day that I turned around to come back, I had driven 5 hours to go back. I was all by myself. I hadn't had anything to eat and they hadn't put her in a room yet. They were doing a bunch of tests, but they didn't have a room open. So they were kind of waiting for that. And while she was back there, they were having, like, my whole family was having to wait in the waiting room. So I had a friend who called me to check up on me, see how things were going. And she said, you've driven a lot the past couple of days. You already have a lot of emotions going on with the whole moving thing. And then now this, until she gets a room, maybe you should just come over here. I made some food and you can eat. And then as soon as she gets a room, you can go back up there. She only lived about 15 minutes away from the hospital. So to me, that was a good idea. I called my grandma to make sure that she hadn't got a room yet. She said, yeah, go get you something to eat. So I said, okay. I went over to my friend's house. While I was at my friend's house, she called me to tell me that my biological mom had finally got a room. I said, okay, I'm on my way right now. I immediately got up and went to the hospital. Later on, I found out that while that happened, when my grandma had called me to tell me that my mom had got a room, she asked me where I was, and I told her that I went to go eat at my friend's house. Apparently, this upset her. So she told my mom that I chose to go over to my friend's house instead of going to the hospital first, and that meant that I didn't care about her. I didn't find out about this until later, and that night when I was sitting in my car thinking of all of the things I was going to say, and I got out and I went up to the room. She looked at me, and that was the first thing that she said to me. When she looked at me, she mistook me for being her sister and she said, "Did you know that Navy doesn't care about me? That she went to go see her friend instead of coming to see me." And then she said, "Yeah, she doesn't give a fuck about me." So there was definitely tension when it came to the family. I ended up calling my aunt after I left the hospital. I was hysterical. I said, "Why on earth would she tell her that? That's not the case." I turned around. I drove 5 hours back. She told me that I could go get lunch. Why does it matter if I go to lunch at Whataburger or if I go to a friend's house that already cooked a home cooked meal? She agreed, said that it was ridiculous. She didn't know why my grandma treated me this way, which was something that I heard a lot growing up, and told me just to let it go and not pay attention to it. To me, that was something so huge. This was my mother, the person who gave birth to me, and you basically told her that I chose someone over her and that I didn't care about her. And if she would have died, that would have been the last thing that she thought about. The next day, I go up to the hospital. My grandma and my aunt are up there. We spend some time with my mom, and later on, me and my grandma get into it over what she said. She tried to shut down the conversation, said that I was making everything about me, and she actually ended up leaving the hospital because of me. Granted, I'm not the one who raised my voice. I am not the one who freaked out. I simply brought it up and said that it was messed up that she did that and how it hurt my feelings. I would say that this is where the turmoil between me and my grandma actually started. Not originally started, but at this point. Because to me, that was something really huge and something that honestly could have changed my life forever had I thought that she died thinking I chose someone else over her and that I didn't care about her. Also, I felt a huge weight on my shoulders at this point because I am an only child when it comes to my mom. So if any decisions had to be made, they would have had to be made by me. After she was stable, I ended up coming back to Illinois. It was a rough transition once I came here. I felt immense guilt for leaving her. I had no idea what the future held or how much time I had with her or if she was going to make it through this. It really started to take its toll on me, and I decided to start therapy. After I started therapy, he asked me if I knew about adoption trauma. And of course, I had no idea. I had never heard of that ever in my life. But if you know anything about me, as soon as he said that, after I got out of my appointment, I started researching everything. I started seeing all these stories about people that felt the same way that I felt when I was growing up, people who had gone through similar situations, and it was the most validated I've ever felt in my entire 30 years, which is why I want to share it with you guys today, just so that you can be more aware of adoption trauma, and what it does to the adoptee, because oftentimes we are either ignored or silenced. So I'm going to start with telling you what adoption trauma is. Adoption trauma is the psychological and emotional impact of being separated from your biological parents, even if the adoption was necessary or done with good intention. It's rooted in this truth. Adoption always begins with loss. Even in the best case scenarios, a child loses their first family, history, culture, or identity. That loss leaves a big mark. So we have pre-verbal separation. Even as a baby, being separated from your mother can be traumatic. Infants can experience intense distress from losing the person whose voice, smell, and heartbeat they've known since they've been in the womb. The nervous system can record this separation as danger, even if you were too young to remember. Identity confusion. Many adoptees grow up asking, "Who am I? Why wasn't I kept? What does my name mean? Where do I belong?" When you're told to just move on or be grateful, it invalidates your grief and curiosity. Adoption often comes with unspoken grief over missing parents, siblings, culture, and truth. But adoptees are rarely given space to mourn. Instead, they're told, "You are chosen. You're lucky. Don't be ungrateful." That's not comfort, it's emotional gaslighting. We also have this pressure to perform, to be easier to raise, to be emotionally strong or quiet about our pain or forever grateful. This can lead to people pleasing, anxiety, perfectionism, or identity masking, which, if you heard my last episode, I talked about identity masking. We also have this split loyalty or emotional disconnect. Especially in kinship adoptions like mine, it can make it worse when it comes to calling my grandma mom and my aunt my sister. It's as if they're erasing my life and replacing it by saying love us instead of them. And it makes you emotionally torn between two truths and punished for expressing either one of those. Some of the signs of adoption trauma in adulthood can be chronic identity struggles, fear of abandonment or rejection, difficulty trusting or attaching, intense guilt for being angry at caregivers, feeling not enough or like a burden, deep sadness with no clear reason, and craving your roots but feeling shame for it. You don't get over this by pretending that it didn't hurt you. You heal this by naming the loss, letting yourself grieve, reclaiming your story, and making space for two things to be true at once: love and pain, gratitude and anger, survival and loss. Adoption trauma is not about blaming your adoptive family. It's about honoring what was taken so that you can fully heal. You can love the people who raised you and still grieve the family name and truth that you lost, which is what I'm doing and also giving you space to do on this podcast. If you're listening to this podcast and you are not adopted, but you want to know how to help children that do not have parents, I'm going to give you some ways to do that. So number one, you could become a mentor or a consistent adult through programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or local youth centers. Consistency and presence can offer emotional safety and trust, which is huge. Number two, you could offer respite or kinship support. Help kinship caregivers like grandparents or relatives by providing childcare, meals, transportation, or just rest. These caregivers are often overwhelmed and unsupported by the system. I know this to be true in my own experience. My grandma would often put the blame on these things as to why she couldn't spend more time with me and why things were harder for us because she didn't get help from anyone. It was just her. Number three, you can support foster youth without fostering. So you can volunteer with organizations that provide tutoring, job prep, care packages, or safe housing for teens aging out of foster care. Many of the older youth don't get adopted and need real world tools and emotional support. Number four, fund scholarship or sponsor activities. You can pay for extracurriculars, school supplies, therapy, or college funds, especially impactful for kids being raised in group homes or by relatives with limited income. Number five, you can advocate for systemic change. You can push for better policies in child welfare, family preservation, trauma-informed care, and post-placement support. Vote, donate, write letters, or support organizations led by former foster youth and adoptees. Number six, you can build community around families at risk. Support parents facing poverty, addiction recovery, or mental health challenges so children aren't removed unnecessarily. Help keep families together before adoption or foster care is seen as the only path. Many people are so quick to judge others, but are not quick to help. We are all human and we all need help sometimes. Number seven, host or support transitional housing. Partner with local shelters or nonprofits to offer safe, temporary housing for teens or young adults without stable families. Many fall through the cracks after 18. Number eight, make care kits or emergency bags. For kids entering foster care or group homes, things like pajamas, toothbrushes, journals, stuffed animals, and comfort items go a long way. And number nine, share stories that center their voices. Uplift adoptee and foster care alumni perspectives. help shift the narrative from savior stories to survivor and self-determined stories. Speaking of savior stories, the savior complex is such a real thing, and especially in my own experience. My grandma chose adoption instead of guardianship. She renamed me instead of letting me keep my original last name. She changed my birth certificate. She rewrote the family tree. And the biggest part of it is that she seems so uncomfortable with me telling my story, even now. All of these are classic signs of savior complex, especially in kinship adoption. If you don't know what the savior complex is, it's when someone needs to be seen as like a hero or a rescuer or the one that fixed everything, even if it comes at the expense of the person that they're saving. So they'll often ignore the complexity of the situation, dismiss the needs or the voice of the person that they're helping. They get angry or hurt when the person doesn't show enough gratitude, or they rewrite the story to center their role, not the person's lived experience. In my case, she made a legal move that erased my identity. Instead of being my guardian or staying in her role as my grandma, she legally adopted me and had me call her mom. She can sit there and say all day long that I'm the one that chose it. I was a child who did not know any better. She was the adult and she should have corrected it. Because that's not caregiving, it's control. It's saying I saved you, so now I get to decide who you are. She expected gratitude, not grief. If I ever tried to express hurt, confusion, or sadness, she always shut it down or made me feel guilty about it. And this is because savior-minded people often can't tolerate being seen as anything but good. So I wasn't allowed to be a grieving child. I had to be a grateful one. And with her not wanting me to tell my story now, even as a grown adult, just proves this theory, because the savior complex crumbles when the person being saved starts to speak up. It threatens the narrative of I did everything right. And that's why this would feel threatening to her, even if it's not meant to attack her. And I don't say any of this to say that she's evil, because I think that she meant well, but she just caused harm anyway. The savior complex often comes from unprocessed trauma or just someone's ego. So maybe she was ashamed of my mom and just wanted to clean it up. Maybe she needed to feel like the strong one who stepped in. Maybe being seen as mom gave her identity or validation that she wasn't getting somewhere else. It doesn't make her evil, but it does mean that she made decisions based on what she needed and not what I needed. So yes, she gave me a home, but she also took away my truth. She raised me, and she also erased parts of me to feel like a savior. Both can be true. Okay, so moving on to the legal alternatives to adoption, because this is very important. A lot of people, when they're arguing about adoption, only prove to all of these adoptees that are trying to make people more aware that they're not doing the needed research, that they're not doing it for the child. This is all self-centered. So number one is legal guardianship. This is where a court grants you the legal right to care for a child and make decisions, whether it be educational, medical, etc., but it does not terminate the rights of the biological parent. This happens when the parents aren't able to care for their child. This could be short-term or long-term, but adoption isn't appropriate or isn't wanted. Number two is kinship care. There's formal and informal. So formal kinship care is when the child lives with a relative or a close family friend, and the arrangement is recognized by child welfare services. Informal kinship care is when a relative cares for the child without court involvement. Some kinship caregivers apply for guardianship or custody, but not adoption, especially if keeping legalities to the biological parents is important. Number three is custody. This is legal or physical. Legal custody, you can make decisions about the child's life, school, healthcare, etc. Physical custody is the child lives with you. You can be granted through family court, often to relatives or trusted adults if parents are unfit or unavailable. But again, Again, parental rights are not terminated. Number 4, standby guardianship. Used when a parent is seriously ill or facing incarceration. This allows someone to step in and legally care for the child without permanently changing guardianship or custody. It's often planned in advance for peace of mind. Number 5 is foster care. Licensed caregivers, including relatives, provide care while the child welfare system works towards family reunification or another permanent plan. Kinship foster care allows relatives to be licensed and receive support while the child stays connected to their family of origin. Number 6 is power of attorney for childcare. This is a temporary legal arrangement where a parent gives someone else authority to make decisions for the child, like for medical or school. This is often used for short-term caregiving, such as military deployment or recovery periods. And number 7 is planned permanent living arrangement, or PPLA. This is for older youth who don't want to be adopted or have strong connections with non-parental adults. This offers stability without terminating parental rights. And I'm about to get into why that's so important. All of these preserve the child's identity and origin. Adoption often erases legal, cultural, and familial ties, especially when names are changed and birth records are sealed. Alternatives like guardianship or kinship care respect the child's roots, so they stay connected to their name, heritage, or family of origin. It also acknowledges the child's existing family instead of replacing it. Adoption legally severs the parental rights, even if the parents were struggling but not abusive. Guardianship and kinship care allow the kids to maintain bond with their biological family without erasing them, honoring grief and complexity instead of pretending that it's like a blank slate or a fresh start. It reduces the trauma of legal relabeling. So being adopted can feel like being rebranded, new parents, new last name, and often a pressure to be grateful. And alternatives like legal custody or standby guardianship, the child doesn't have to question who they belong to. They know who their parents are and who is helping them right now. It allows for reunification or flexibility because adoption is permanent. So even if the original parents recover or stabilize, or if they just want to reconnect later, most of the time they can't, or it's extremely hard. And these alternatives leave the door open for reunification when it's safe without forcing the child to choose between the people that they love. And that savior complex that I was just talking about, it helps to avoid that too. Because adoption can unintentionally reinforce the savior complex, but kinship care, guardianship, and custody are often more humble because they're focused on support and not possession. It protects the child's legal rights and their history. In many adoptions, original birth certificates are sealed, and adoptees must fight to get access to their own records. In my case, my last name was changed, and so was my birth certificate. So these alternatives, they allow those children to retain access to their medical, familial, and cultural history. Because for a lot of people, not being able to know what your medical history is rough, to say the least. And this also meets the child's needs without forcing a new narrative on them. Because sometimes the child just needs stability, not a new identity or a whole new family. And these alternatives provide the care, safety, and structure that the child needs without imposing this new version of family that doesn't match how they actually feel. And it also helps to center the child's voice because many kids don't even want to be adopted. And those alternatives respect their wishes. Legal guardianship or long-term custody can provide that security without overriding the child's sense of self. The best solution is contextual and child-centered, not adult-centered. Adoption can feel like a solution for adults who want a child, but those alternatives are often solutions for children who need support without being erased. So now that we know all of that, when you come back to my story, you will see that I lost more than I gained. I lost my original last name. It was changed to the family name. I lost a legal connection with my dad. And I also lost my right to call people who they actually are, which would be calling my grandma instead of calling her my mom. And although it may not seem much to someone who hasn't gone through any of this, it caused a lot of deep confusion and identity pain for me. Because had those things not happened, I would have been able to preserve my sense of self, to validate my relationship with my biological mother and my biological father without erasing it. And it would have given me more room to grieve and belong at the same time. It could have reduced that psychological split of like, oh, this person's raising me and says they're my mom, but I know they're not. I already have a mom. In other words, the guardianship would have allowed my grandma to take care of me legally without requiring everyone to pretend the family tree had changed. That pretending, calling people different names, and rewriting roles can create lasting emotional dissonance. And it also could have helped me to feel seen. A lot of my pain was overlooked. My grief wasn't allowed. And I feel like that's because I had this pressure to be grateful even if I was hurting. And had my grandma done guardianship, she could have still raised me, but with a legal structure that left space for my truth, that my mom was still my mom, and that I was still who I am before all of the paperwork. My emotions could have been honored instead of dismissed as ungrateful. So would it have solved everything? No. I still would have experienced the loss, the confusion, and likely the pain from my mom's struggles. But a different legal path could have given me more truth to stand on, less rewriting, and more room to feel what was real. I didn't need to be adopted to be loved. I needed to be loved without being erased. And let me be completely clear, for those who have the excuse that they did the adoption to help the child and cut the ties with the parents because it was dangerous or because they weren't in a good situation, because that argument still does not work. Yes, the parents can go to court and try to regain custody later if you choose one of the alternatives to adopting, but it's nothing that's automatic. They can't just come to the house and take the child back. So guardianship doesn't terminate parental rights. Your mom and dad would still be your legal parents, but they'd have to prove in court that they were stable, safe, and able to parent. Judges consider the child's best interest, and if they were thriving with the person who had guardianship, then the court may not change anything, even if the biological parents wanted to. But with adoption, your parents' rights are permanently and legally terminated. That means they legally stopped being your parent. They had no right to come back for you, ever. And you had no legal right to them either. No inheritance right, no medical info access, no voice in the matter, nothing. Adoption wasn't a blessing for me. It was a series of choices made about me without me. Imagine being a child and hearing that when your mom was asked if she was sure that she wanted to go through with the adoption, she shouted at your grandma as if the question itself was absurd. And your dad, he asked, if I sign this paper, does that mean that I won't have to pay child support? And then said, oh, well, I can just have other kids. What is a child supposed to do with that? I didn't get comfort. I got silence. I got resentment. My aunt hated me. My grandma who adopted me acted like I ruined her life. Nobody wanted me. I learned early that I was a burden. And when I tried to speak to other adults, especially at school, they all knew my grandma. And their answer was always the same. You should be grateful. But no one ever asked what I felt. No one said, that must have hurt. So if you've ever felt unwanted, unseen, or silenced, this space is for you. You're not ungrateful. You're not dramatic. You're not broken. You're just carrying pain that no one gave you permission to name. And to the adoptee listening, I see you. Everything you're feeling is totally valid. To anyone else listening, I hope that this helps you understand just how much adoption can cost the child, especially when their voice is never a part of the decision. This is the Unburied Collective, where we dig up what others buried and let it breathe.